Well, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Hi, good evening, welcome. Travelers from near and far, and even surprise travelers that we didn't know were going to be here tonight. Charlotte Area SharePoint User Group, my name is Andy. I'm only going to be your tormentor here for a little while. Usually I torment people for hours at a time in classrooms, but tonight just for a little bit. I want to welcome you to May meeting. This is pretty exciting. We've got some special guests in the room for a pretty awesome meeting. A little bit of housekeeping as we kind of get things started. We are in the big push for SharePoint and Office 365 Saturday. Yes, you heard that correct. If you haven't heard, it's SharePoint and Office 365 Saturday. We are evolving a little bit. It's going to be more than just SharePoint. We're going to have tracks for SharePoint on-premise, SharePoint online. We're going to have tracks for Power Apps and Flow, Power BI. Also going to have some Microsoft Teams, and I think we might even have some fun stuff sprinkled in there. Who knows? We've been going through. We've got a lot of speakers that have already submitted. We've got about 25 sessions already. 20 sessions already selected. We'll fill it out. I think last year we had about 32 sessions overall.
32 and 2 keynotes.
And we're looking at 2 keynotes again this year. We're waiting on final confirmation. We will announce those very, very soon. Really excited about that. But we love doing SharePoint Saturday. It's kind of our year-long thing. We've actually been planning for this year's event since last year's event ended. It seems like it's a never-ending cycle with some of us, but it's really exciting. So you'll see some of those kind of popping up on the screen. A lot of Microsoft MVPs, certified trainers, a lot of Microsoft employees. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're hosting that August 10th here in Charlotte at UNCC's Center City campus. That's the weird Lego looking building in the middle. Was that First Ward? By the First Ward Park. So it was last year, right? Same place it was last year. Yep. So it's August 10th at UNC Center City campus. We'll kick off around 8:30, 9 in the morning. Go all day, probably have a SharePoint afterward. You'll be numb with information by the time we get to the end of it. But we're starting to announce speakers already. You'll find that on SBS events. Just go to sbsevents.org and look for Charlotte. We're on there, and you'll find a list of speakers, and we'll start putting together a schedule and some of the sessions in a little bit. Who's already signed up for SharePoint Saturday? Signed up? Yes. Awesome. Cool. Giving away swag in the room. If you're not here in person, I'm sorry. Who else has already signed up? You guys are my early bird registers. Love it. That comes with love from the Microsoft Teams team back in Redmond. It's a little mouse pad / screen cleaner. Let's see. Who's gonna sign up after my speech there?
While he's throwing those out, if anybody wants these are old leftover shirts from past events. We've got some. Actually, they all have these are all ladies, so if your wife likes to wear polos, we've got some.
I got a good one. Any SharePoint Server 2003 server users? SharePoint Server 2003.
Hopefully not, because it's not supported.
Screeches to
He still got one. He still has one.
Oh my God.
Well, you have a choice. You can have a stress ball, or you can have the screen cleaner.
The stress ball probably slow.
Yeah. Good catch.
Awesome. So SharePoint Server 2007. Everyone.
That still runs.
I started with that one actually when I was working here.
So you went through the growing pains?
Yeah.
Right. That's any 2010s? SharePoint Server 2010s?
You already got one.
Let me switch to that one. I don't have that much of stress anymore.
All right, I got to give this to somebody. Who's a OneNote power user?
OneNote.
OneNote power user.
And you know.
I shouldn't have even had to ask that question. Yes. All right. Let's see. I got a couple more to give away. What else? You got to do a little trivia.
Now everybody raises their hands. Hopefully.
Something about flow. Okay.
Actually, let the speaker ask the trivia. he probably knows something about the flow. He knows a thing or two about flow. You got a trivia for us?
What is the maximum number of nested conditions you can have in a flow?
Oh, that's how
I'll
you
answer that one.
Unlimited? That would be a great answer, but unfortunately, no, it's actually, I guess, Price is Right style. It would be you, right? Because, well, no, so it's 5.
That's close enough. We'll go.
Let's go with that. Note to self that Stephen has questions again.
How about what's the total number of actions you can use in a flow?
Even I don't know the answer to that one. I know it's above 60.
See, there was an NDA at a conference like a week ago.
Yep.
They gave a definite number on that.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sure there is one. I've definitely never hit it.
Interesting. They said it was 250 actions within a single flow.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I got a good one, Andy. This might, I mean, he might get affected by that. Anybody over here who thinks SharePoint Designer is better than Flow?
Not better, you gotta qualify that. Not better, but there are activities within SharePoint Designer that you still can't do.
Correct.
That's fair.
Yeah. Well, you probably can, right? But you have to call web service and do all that kind of stuff and not use the connector.
Natively out of the box.
Right.
All right, I got one. It's not flow related, but who traveled the furthest to get here tonight?
You got a guy from High Point right here.
Texas.
Minus
Texas.
Who did you travel from Dallas specifically to be here tonight?
Did you register?
All right, we'll clarify. Who registered and traveled the furthest to be here tonight?
Baltimore, Maryland.
Greenville, Baltimore, Greenville, South Carolina. I think Baltimore's a little bit further.
Yeah, well, that's fine. You know the reason why I'm here.
Does anybody know who he is?
You know this guy's name?
You know his name?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question,
Does
right?
anybody know?
Here's some trivia for you.
I survived my SharePoint Designer workflow days because of him. Billions. He is the SharePoint Designer 2013 workflows, 2010 workflows guy.
But to be very specific, not 2016, no.
Baby is like, I don't want to be stuck in the past. I don't want to be associated with that.
All right.
All right. So we've got, kind of getting back, we got SharePoint Saturday coming up on August 10th. Next month's meeting will be a wrap up or a review of SharePoint conference, which is next week in Las Vegas. I know Daniel and I will be there. Anybody else going? Fabian, a couple others. Awesome. Looking forward to hanging out with you guys. Let's have a SharePoint while we're there. So next month, we're going to do a recap of SharePoint conference, talk about some of the things that they've announced, some of the things that are going to be kind of coming down the line. We'll work on that. I believe that's June 20. Is that the right date? Anyways, it's on Meetup. So sign up on Meetup, and we'll see you for that meeting. Outside of that, I just want to take a moment and say thank you to the sponsors that are helping us to run the club. Also, the sponsors that are helping us to put on SharePoint Saturday or SharePoint Office 365 Saturday. We couldn't do it without them. We've had a number of sponsors actually step up and help. We've got Insight, we've got Quest, we've got C5, and a few others that have been huge contributors. So without them, we couldn't put on the event. Also, if you haven't signed up and you're interested in going, sign up early. That helps us to recruit better speakers, helps us to recruit other sponsors so we can put on a great event for you. So go ahead and sign up. And if you sign up and you're not going to be able to attend, just let us know. That way we know how much food to order so we don't have a whole lot of extra. But that being said, we hope you all make it to that event. Really looking forward to that. I'm going to stop running my mouth now, and I'm going to turn it over to our speaker here tonight, coming all the way from Redmond. We have Stephen. He is a program manager with Flow. He's actually one of the originals. He's been on the Flow team going on 5 years now. He knows a heck of a lot more about Flow than I do. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Here we go. So, how many of you all have built the flow before? Okay, so about 2/3. That is good. Of the people who have actually built the flow, how many people actually rely on flow for an important business process in your organization? Okay, so less than half. When we talk about flow, our goal with flow is definitely to create something that everybody can rely on in their organization for real automation, right? Real workflow capabilities. When we started flow, so we started in about 2015 or so working on flow, building as a separate product. It started off as, we're thinking about personal automation, individual productivity, those types of things, and definitely has evolved over time to be this real enterprise grade workflow platform that we hope to really replace all the scenarios that you can do today inside of SharePoint. And the reason why we started building flow was there was all of these different systems out there that people are doing manual processes in. There's a huge number of processes today that are being done just in Excel, where people are doing, whole applications in Excel, not even necessarily by using VBA. They're literally just doing formulas and calculations and tabs and all of these things where their whole business is just running off of Excel. And that's kind of crazy if you think about it, because Excel is a very flexible tool, but it's not necessarily something you want your entire business running off of. But it's not just there. The same thing we think about email. You think about where files are stored on network shares. There's all of this data distributed across organizations, and these systems don't interconnect. I mean, I can't very easily go from Excel to my email, or I can't very easily go from files stored on network to SharePoint and vice versa. You can write point-to-point integrations using PowerShell if you're really skilled, but it's really hard to do that. So with Flow, our goal was to really bring automation into the context of every person inside an organization, to make it possible for anybody that wants to be able to get that automation as a part of their job, to get it so that way they can build something for both themselves and for their enterprise and for the team. So that's why we're building Flow. So how many people have heard of something called RPA? Okay, so a few of you have heard of RPA. So if you haven't heard of RPA, it's a pretty safe bet that you probably will hear about it at some point in the next couple of years, because RPA stands for something called robotic process automation. And this is not one of those instances where the name is self-explanatory, because it has nothing to do with robots at all. What it really is about process automation, and specifically where the name comes from is this idea of, if you are a person sitting at your desktop clicking between windows and copying and pasting and doing things, why not have a robot, a software robot, do that on your behalf? So the idea with robotic process automation is to automate the simple tasks that people are doing on their PCs every day using software robots. And the reason I bring this up is because there's been a lot of interest. If you look at where VCs are spending a lot of their money, if you look at articles that are being written in business magazines about automation is coming, automation is going to be really important for future businesses, and RPA is definitely riding this wave. But what's interesting about RPA is it's really kind of an old way of thinking. Because what RPA is about is taking the exact same task that I'm doing on my PC and just having a button that replicates those same 5 clicks, or that copy pasting between things. So you can do it that way, and there are definitely going to be organizations that will be very successful doing that. But with Flow, we like to think about Flow as not only can it do those same types of things, but it also can bring intelligence into your processes. So it can take it from just doing these couple manual tasks to really bringing in AI that Microsoft has across many different surfaces, and to bring this all into a single process that can span across all of these different systems and really bring together the data in wherever it is across the organization into a single end-to-end process. So that's really where we're going with Microsoft Flow. How many people have heard of the Power Platform? Okay, so most of you, that's good. So the Power Platform is one of those things that it's a new name, but it's an old concept. So this used to be called the Business Application Platform, if you've ever heard that. But really all it is we have this set of capabilities with Power Apps, Flow, and Power BI that really enable all of the different applications that are at Microsoft. So SharePoint, Dynamics, Teams, Office 365 applications, to have a layer of extensibility that anybody, even people who are not pro developers, can use. And that's really the goal with the Power Platform, is to create something that many people can leverage without having to have pro dev skills. So I'm here talking about Flow today, but Power BI and Power Apps also fit into the same category because they enable people who aren't professional BI guys to be able to go and build dashboards and reports, or people who aren't app developers to be able to build applications. So that's really the goal with the Power Platform. And that's why our audience, when we talk about why do we care about Flow, is because we really want to enable more and more people to build out automation. So, you know, if you think about the characteristics of Flow, what does it do? It enables people to build and model business processes with advanced loops and conditions. We have over 250 connectors today, so this slide is already a little out of date. We've recently added even more connectors. So really, no matter where the data is, our goal is to be able to connect to it. But not only that, we also have this concept called custom connectors that allow people to reach to data in an existing system, be it on premises or in the cloud, and use that data in that system in your Flow, even if we don't have a built-in connector. And it's a little bit of extra work to get that thing to connect up, but it's still possible. And we also have a really great, what we call governance and compliance story. So with Flow, we get a lot of people who hear that initial pitch of empowering everybody to automate, and they freak out a little bit, right? Because, oh my gosh, everybody in my organization is going to be going wild. They're going to automate everything, and I'm not going to have any visibility or control or management. And in reality, with Flow, what we offer is the ability to see, as an admin, every single thing that Flow is doing. We have analytics and reports that you can see trends of usage inside your organization, plus audit logs that track every single time anybody creates a Flow or edits a Flow, who did it, what they did. All of that is completely tracked, so that way admins can manage that and control it. They can even create policies that can proactively block certain things that meet certain criteria. If I want to block data from going from SharePoint to Twitter, for example, you can actually block that proactively. So really, we think that having this level of governance and compliance is super important. And Flow can also save companies money. So there's definitely implementation costs associated with it for, you know, a real enterprise-grade implementation of Flow and Power Apps. But we've found when we're talking to clients that they can save their investment in just 3 months. You can pay itself back, and with ROI of over 350%. So it's definitely worth looking at this as a way to modernize and develop this automation inside of organizations. And one other thing is with Flow, I started off by talking about those end users who need to be able to automate themselves. But we've also found there's a lot of people who are professional developers who are actually starting to use Flow themselves, because it's so fast to build processes using Flow, and it's so much easier than deploying a web service and putting it in Azure and managing the code and the source control and all that stuff, that for many scenarios it's just faster and easier to use Flow to build these things. So these low-code platforms that we call, they're not just for people who don't write code. They're also for pro developers that need the ability to build something and do it very rapidly. With Flow, we start with templates. So templates are a very easy way to get started, and I'll jump into a demo in a couple minutes and kind of go through how all this works. But templates are definitely the easy starting point because they pre-configure everything. But we don't stop there, because what we enable is people to take those templates and customize them to meet your needs. So that way they can do whatever you need for your own business process. And even beyond that, if you want to be able to further use your assets that may be in Azure, for example, you can leverage those from Flow as well. And there's connectivity between all of these different aspects. So we like to say that there's no cliffs in this solution, because even as you get more and more advanced in what you're building, you still can leverage the same assets that you've built before. And of course, this is especially useful for you all, is we have deep integration into Dynamics 365 and all of the Office 365 technologies. So Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Excel, all of these products have integration with Flow. We can even do things like generate Word documents from right inside of Microsoft Flow. So a lot of different opportunities across the Office suite to leverage Microsoft Flow. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to a demo and show some things off. So what I'm going to try to hit on is, because many of you have used Flow before, I'm going to try to hit on some of the new features that we have, but also cover some of the basic building blocks. So for those of you who haven't used Flow before. So when you come to Flow, like I mentioned, the easiest way to get started is by using templates. So we have this gallery here that actually has literally thousands of templates. So I can't possibly scroll through them all in this meeting, nor will I try to. But just to give you a sense of how long this list goes, and you can see these templates are pretty commonly used. And you could click on any one of these templates, and if you have an account for whatever it is, it's really easy to get started. So like this random one that just popped up is run sentiment analysis on tweets and push the results into a Power BI data set. So this template, what it would do if I clicked on this is it would listen to some keyword in Twitter. It would use Azure Text Analytics, an AI-based service, to say, hey, is that something that is a positive tweet or is it a negative tweet? And based on that, it could push it into Power BI so you could generate dashboards and reports on that. And that's all wired up already. You don't need to do anything special to get that to work. But because this is a SharePoint group, I think let's look at some approval scenarios, because approvals are one of the common things that people do with SharePoint workflow. And we have first classed a lot of the approval functionality directly into Microsoft Flow, so that way it can really be a high quality experience. So what I'm going to, question right there.
I just wanted to ask a question, like, for example, I'm comparing with Nintex.
Mm-hmm.
So like Nintex is enabled like as a feature if you wanted to use the Nintex on a SharePoint site.
Yep.
What is the connection with Flow? It comes as a feature because I see it's a web-based kind of like a tool.
Yeah.
So how it connects with your SharePoint? Like, okay, you have your SharePoint environment and where Flow comes from. So where is that connection before you actually start using the templates?
So Flow runs as a part of your Office 365 installation. So it runs all, like technically it runs in Azure, just like everything else Microsoft does. So it's actually any Office 365 license comes with a set of Flow functionality. So every Office 365 user can do a wide variety of things with Flow for free out of the box. And similar to Nintex, there is premium functionality that we have that you can pay additional for. And to get that a premium functionality, then you can pay for that as well. But inside of SharePoint, so if I just go to a SharePoint list, we actually have direct integrations into SharePoint lists that work out of box as well as into OneDrive. So I can come here and say, there's this Flow button that shows up on every OneDrive list. So I can, click on a particular item, and I can actually trigger a flow based on that. The same thing exists here inside of SharePoint. So if I go to a particular folder, if I find a file or an item that in SharePoint lists or a file in a SharePoint document library, I can select that file, click the Flow button, and you can see it's actually popping something up to indicate me to click on this. But you click on it, and you can see there's two flows already set up for this list that are named the same thing, but you can create new flows right from here, right inside of the context of the SharePoint list.
And so this is kind of like the part of the Office 365 package. If you
Yep,
like that.
that's exactly right.
You have like on-prem installation, like a SharePoint on-prem.
Yep.
And how do you use the Flow?
So this Flow button doesn't show up in SharePoint on premises, but if you do have an Office 365 subscription, or even if you don't, what you can do is you can connect to a SharePoint on-premises installation from the cloud with Microsoft Flow. So Microsoft Flow doesn't run on premises, so like the actual business logic does not run in the on-premises installation, but we do have the ability to connect to any system that runs on premises. And then you can build that workflow just like, so I'll show you what it looks like to build the workflow in a minute. But just like you can build that workflow in the cloud, that data source could just be an on-premises SharePoint list, right? So wherever your data lives, you can build these workflows on top of it. And you just need, to have something up in the cloud to kind of catch that and to work with it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This approval, we have SharePoint, classic SharePoint, we have two, right?
Mhm.
Approval is one and recursive approval. State machine workflow.
Yep.
Can we implement the state machine workflow also using Flow?
Yeah. So pretty much any of those control flow concepts that you have inside of SharePoint Workflow Designer that you can do in Flow. Sometimes the way that you do something in Flow is going to behave a little differently or look differently than the way it does inside of SharePoint Workflow. But I can show you an example of how you could do something exactly like that.
State machine.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we take a look at these templates here, like one of the easiest things about templates is when you click on these, all of those actions are pre-configured, right? So in this case, what I want to do is just take something from Microsoft Forms, and when somebody submits a Microsoft Forms form, I'm going to send an approval task out. And that approval task can contain any amount of customized whatever I would like. And then after that, it's going to, if the item is approved, create something in the SharePoint list. So this template you can see has already dropped on actions onto this designer canvas. And inside of Flow, there's two important concepts to get started with. Let me make this a little bigger. At the top, there is the trigger. So this is the event that kicks off the flow. So if you're thinking in classic SharePoint terms, you really only had a couple triggers. It was, something happens in a SharePoint list or a SharePoint document library. That was pretty much all you could do before. But with Flow, we actually support triggers. We have hundreds of different triggers across many, many different connectors. So anything that happens in any of those services can actually kick off a flow. Plus, we have, of course, basic scheduled tasks if I want to run something every day. And we have the ability to invoke flows on demand. So I could have a button, for example, on my mobile phone, or even a physical button. We have some partners where they manufacture these buttons you can click, and it'll actually run a flow. So you can have a button on your desk that you can click that goes off and runs a flow. And all of these things can be used to trigger a flow. And when you're building a flow, sometimes you'll have to configure additional information, such as for this, I want to pick which form is actually going to be triggering this flow. So I could have lots of forms, right? So in this case, I have an onboarding form that I've created. Now, what I'm going to do is this form could have a lot of submissions. So this template has a loop. It's going over each of the submissions that are happening, and it's going to get the details about that. So I can just select which particular form I was listening to, and then it's going to send out an approval task. And these approval tasks, we've added a few new capabilities here. So it used to be that this is pretty limited. It only had approve, reject, but we've actually added some other capabilities now. So for example, I could have a rich set of custom response options. If I want things well beyond approve and reject, I could do that here. And I can actually fully customize the set of options here. So I could say, yes, no, maybe, ask again later. You can put in really whatever you would like into these approval options. And I guess we're waiting for the projector to come back. Does anybody know what's happening here?
You exceed your monthly credits.
Everybody jump on Teams.
Yeah, you can just open up your laptops and play along.
All right, we might have to actually power down and power up, which is part of the pain here.
buttons.
Yeah, we should have a button to power cycle everything.
I can give this one away.
It's the only way we ever get it to work is if we power down.
Okay.
The problem is it might have to cool down.
Yeah.
What makes the premium? How do you need a source account? How do you get the premium parts of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of how to think about premium, yeah. So yeah, that's the button. So in terms of how to think about premium, generally it has to do with the activities that you use in a flow. So there's some activities which are we call standard activities that just come out of box. If you think about just creating items in SharePoint, those are all standard, right? So there's nothing too special there. But we have a bunch of connectors that are premium. So the ability to work with data from Salesforce, or the ability to use Workday, or talk to custom HTTP endpoints. So like all these things are premium. And
so if I see premium listed, I can use it because I apparently have the account for it.
So the ability to create something, we don't actually block you from creating. What happens is if you then share that flow or start using that flow, you have to have an account that's properly licensed to use it. The premium licenses for Flow are standalone on top of E3 or E5, and they're also included with the Dynamics licenses as well as the Power Apps licenses. So if you have Power Apps, for example, that comes with Flow. Or if you have Dynamics, that comes with Flow as well.
Okay.
No, it's just the cable moved a little bit. Yep. So when you're building on Flow, so obviously you can type information in, put in some options here. You can also pass data from step to step. So this uses something that we call dynamic content that allows me to use any information that I have in my flow. And in this case, for the approval title, I'm just going to use the name from this form. We also have like a people picker, so I can type my email address here, and it'll go to the directory and find people whose email starts with stepsic. That's just my email address, and it goes on from there. So once I've built this approval action, then what's going to happen is I'm going to have a condition. And this condition is how you have different types of logic in your flow to branch depending on what you want to happen. So in this particular case, I have the ability to choose, hey, based on the response of this request, I could say if the response is equal to yes, then I'm going to go create an item in a SharePoint list. And now this is where actually, if I wanted to connect to an on-premises SharePoint list, I could actually do that right here. So if I had an on-premises SharePoint list, I could, rather than picking from this list of SharePoint lists in Office 365, I could actually make a connection to some on-premises SharePoint list. So in this case, I don't have any, but you can imagine here, you could put in the URL for an on-premises SharePoint list.
Can you limit the connection to online?
Limit the connection to online.
Our company doesn't like to put information in the cloud.
So if
They
you
like to keep it on premise, but they don't want to open up a tool like this if an end user or developer can still go write flow and push something.
But you can't necessarily get online natively because you got to remember you have a firewall, so you'd have to use a connector to bridge the gap between your local area network and the cloud anyway. So as long as that doesn't exist, you can't get in.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is even if you allow people through the firewall, we have this concept in Flow called data loss prevention policies. You can actually put in place to block data that passes between connectors. So if you want to say, hey, I want my SharePoint on-premises data to stay, amongst my other on-premises services, and I don't want it to be sent to Salesforce, which is a cloud service, you could actually block that flow of data using a policy.
Is there any way to block a particular connector altogether? Let's say you got a bunch of folks who use the Twitter connector no matter what.
So almost, basically what you can do is you can create a policy that says I can either send data to or read data from this connector, at which point it's functionally blocked.
There's connectors that are a little more generic, like the SQL Server connector.
Yep.
Where my point of view is starting to define that as that business or is that not, because the SQL Server could be owned by my company or it might not be.
Yep. Yep.
So where should that connector be? Should it be business data or not?
Unfortunately, there is no easy answer. The short answer I can give is generally I see most enterprises putting SQL into business data because they do have business data in that SQL database. Now, what you can do is if you want more, and we've seen a lot of enterprises doing this actually, if you want more granular control over this thing beyond just the kind of the coarse grained policies that we create, we have a series of, so we have connectors, right? We also have connectors that you can use to manage flow. So we have a connector called the flow administration connector. And what people are doing is you can use the flow administration connector to automate the, say, the approval or the deletion or the auditing of the use of flow inside your organization. So you could, for example, create a flow approval connector or a flow admin connector action that says, you know, iterate over all of the different SharePoint or SQL connections that are being used. And if it's a SQL connection that's not in, say, an approved list of SQL connections, delete it. So because it's this automation engine and it can be used to automate itself, you actually can get really granular in terms of the types of things that you're enabling or disabling just by using the tool. You don't have to use, if you want to use PowerShell, or you can do whatever you want, you know. There's APIs for that. But yes, we do see a lot of organizations using flows to administer flows. But that's you know, a fun capability. And yeah, we also see people using Power Apps to administer Power Apps and Power BI to administer Power BI. So, you know, it's all of these things, you know, work together in a kind of a common way. Whoops. When you create an item in SharePoint, one of the other things that Flow does is the fields here change depending on what SharePoint list you connect to, right? Every SharePoint list has a different set of fields. So we automatically pick that up and make sure that we're showing only the relevant information there. And we also can pull information from not only the previous action, but from any of the actions inside of the flow. So inside this flow, I now have data because I'm down at the bottom of the flow. I have data from both this approval action as well as from the form. So as you build more and more actions, you can use that data anywhere in your flow. And this makes it really useful because you can actually query for additional information from other data sources. So if I want to pull in data from an on-premises SQL database, you could actually add a query step to query information from SQL, pull that in, and use that to help you to make your determination on what you want to do. So in this particular case, I'm just going to include, say, the name from the form and the response. You can search this and, you know, find things, and then you click save, and this process will be created. So what I was able to do here is, you know, in just really a couple minutes, build an automatic approval process for forms being submitted. So let's take a look at this in action. So I'm going to test the flow. So I go over to test flow, and now what I got to do is I have to actually submit the form, right? So I have the form up here. It's just a simple onboarding form, and I can click preview. I'm a manager, and you know, Billy is going to be the person, Billy at contoso.com, and Steven is the owner, and I hit submit. And so that's going to submit the form in Microsoft Forms. So if I come back here, it will wait a minute, and you see it's picked up really within just a couple seconds that there was a new form that was submitted, and then it went off and sent an approval. So now if I go to my approval center, I'm going to see that there's a new approval request that has just been sent to me. So the approval center is the single consolidated place where we can show all the approval tasks across your organization. So kind of no matter what process or flow is sending you an approval, you can actually see it here. In this case, so I just submitted a form with Billy. So I can click on this, and here are those approval options that I gave it, right? So I said, you know, a bunch of different options. And if I said yes, then it would actually go and submit that item to SharePoint. So I can, when you're using approvals, you can do this right here from inside of the approval center. You also can do the same exact experience inside of your inbox. So if you get an email, whenever you get an approval assigned to you, you actually get an email with these same buttons. You don't even have to come to the Flow experience. You can actually do it right from your inbox. You can even do it from the mobile app that we have on the phone. Yeah.
How could I render that approval center in Microsoft Teams?
So we actually have a Teams add-in, and I hope this won't mess up because I'm also presenting in Teams. But let me just see if this one has Flow. So if you add Flow to a Microsoft Teams tab, you can do that here by just clicking the plus button, and then Flow is an option right here. And then after you sign in, it'll actually render the approvals right here inside of right inside of Microsoft Teams. So you can actually add that same UI that you see here right inside Teams. Now, the other thing which we actually recently added is one drawback, I guess you could say, of this is somebody actually has to go to the tab, right? The other thing we can do is the ability to send actionable messages right into a Teams channel. So how many people have heard of adaptive cards? Okay, so basically nobody. Not saying that they're not cool. So the adaptive cards are this really new technology that's really interesting that allows you to send rich messages into different channels. So this is an example of an adaptive card here where it has a picture and it has text and these labels and values and dates as well as buttons. So what you can do with Flow is you can actually send an adaptive card directly into a Teams channel, which means if I want to be able to, rather than going to that tab, if I just want to be in my Teams channel and in the conversation over here and have it pop up and write it as a message right here with approve, reject, or whatever, I could actually do that. And you can fully customize that adaptive card to be whatever you would like. You can put images or even like videos right into Microsoft Teams by using that adaptive card. So this is actually a new technology, but it's another way to get people to kind of participate in that approval process.
So this site is very this is a very important site, right? So this allows you to construct that adaptive card and then just copy the JSON into the Flow template, right? So it's really
that's exactly right. So definitely go to adaptivecards.io. But it has all of the the documentation on what you can do with adaptive cards, the types of things that you can include, why we do them. I guess you can watch a video. But yeah, it has. I think the most beautiful thing is this designer that allows you. I can really just go here and move stuff around and make it look much uglier than it did before. Because I'm not trying too hard right now, but you can add and remove whatever you want right onto this this card right here, and now it would send a really ugly message into Microsoft Teams. But obviously, you can do a better job than me if you try. Other questions?
We talked about RPA earlier on right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think I heard some rumors that you guys are working with UiPath. Is that correct?
So at Build, we actually announced a partnership with UiPath. And specifically what we're working on is helping to have the RPA vendors run on Azure. So what's happening is today, if you think about RPA, it's simulating those mouse clicks on people's machines, right? But wouldn't it be great if you could spin up a bunch of virtual machines in Azure and then run these software robots on those machines as well? So that's what UiPath is working with Microsoft on right now.
UiPath does it already with orchestration, right?
So they can, but my understanding, and I'm not familiar with the exact details on this, but my understanding is that we're doing things to make that experience better, to get things set up in Azure much more quickly and more easily.
Is that going to do with containers or VMs?
I don't know the answer to that. Given how everything is going, I would guess containers because I feel like there's a lot of hype around containers, but yeah, I don't know the answer. Yeah.
So for RTA, is UiPath the only vendor you are engaging with, or is it Blue Prism or other vendors?
Automation Anywhere. So I actually I don't know the answer to that either. So I know that there was a this was in the build keynote, I think. Just was that last week or 2 weeks ago? It's hard to keep track of time. But I don't know definitively. I would be willing to bet that there are going to be other partners involved. But I'd have to refer you to that announcement just to see exactly what we said. Yeah, it's a great topic though, and like I said, there's a lot of interest recently in RPA and the types of things that it can do. So we definitely think that it's going to be an area with a lot more interest and viability going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, been using Flow for a few months now. Bumped into a couple of things with it. One being, when you're doing an approval workflow, can you have the approval sent to a group instead of individual people?
That is a great question. So in terms of sending an approval to a group, we don't natively support that today. Now, what you could do if you wanted is get the members of the group and then send the approval to all of the members in the group. But the drawback of that, if somebody else joins the group while the approval is pending, they won't get that approval task. So that's the kind of the workaround that we have right now. But we are actually working on kind of natively assigning approvals to groups. So that way you can just enter the group email address and it'll work.
Is there a technical limitation why that can't be done, or is there something else?
It's just work that has to happen. There are edge cases we have to work through. You know, how do we make sure that when you come to the Flow portal, you actually see all the tasks of not only that are assigned to you, but also all of the groups that you're a member of. So you know, it makes things a bit more complicated. Nothing insurmountable. It's just
permutations.
Yeah, it's just working through all the permutations and getting that working. Yeah.
Which is extensive.
Yes. Because I mean,
go to the owners of the group or the members of the group.
So our current thinking is that it will be the members of the group, but you know, with security groups can contain groups, so it's like you have to, you know, walk that whole tree. So it's definitely not impossible. It's just work that we have to go and to enable that scenario. Yeah, with just Office 365 groups, a little bit easier, but our goal is to actually enable it for both Office 365 and security groups, AD security groups.
The other thing is to build Flow, it's under your account, so I could really create another account that's sort of like a service account where the password doesn't change, so that I got these flows running, and if I change my password later whenever I upload it, doesn't like break everything, so that's the other thing.
So with Flow, when we were working on Flow a while ago, a password change could actually impact ongoing Flow runs. That is actually no longer the case. So just a regular password change actually won't have any impact on the way your flows run. However, there are still cases where if there are changes, for example, in the security policy in your organization, that can cause basically all the existing signed in tokens to be reset. So that can still happen. But you're right, our recommendation would generally be if you have some sort of business critical process to use a system account or a service account instead of a user account as the kind of the authorized connection inside of that process. Now, what you can do is you can have an Office 365 group or a SharePoint list or security group own and manage flows. So if you're talking about the management of the flows, those we would actually, there's no need to use a service account for that, because you can say, hey, I want the workflow managers group to manage, these 5 flows that I have. But in terms of the actual credentials that each flow uses, that's where the service account is important.
Yeah, I just have to follow up on that we had a conversation around flow and service accounts ongoing now for a little while. This is a pretty common use case. I build a flow using my connections, and then I share it with other people. They're using my connections and so forth.
Yep.
So people have used service accounts, but there's been a message. It's come from Microsoft that says don't use service accounts. So what is the stance on using the service accounts?
So the message is a little more nuanced than that. It's don't use service accounts if you don't need to. So specifically, many services support what we call application identities. So if you think about connecting to Azure, for example, Azure supports using an application identity instead of a user identity. So for connecting to Azure from Flow, we would actually say don't use service accounts at all, because you can use that application identity to connect to and work with all that data. Unfortunately, the SharePoint authorization system does not support application-only identities. So there is no way for me to create, like, unlike in Azure, there's no way for me to assign permissions to a SharePoint list to application foo. Like, it doesn't exist. So as a result, for SharePoint, we are kind of stuck with using service accounts until such a time that SharePoint supports the application identities that other services in Microsoft do support. But the important caveat is service accounts do have to be licensed appropriately, right? So, you know, even though generally we say don't use service accounts, what we mean is you can use service accounts as long as they're licensed appropriately and you're minimizing and restricting their use to the specific target scenarios they need to be used in.
So no kiosk mode in one service.
That is correct. You should not be, for example, using a service account to avoid having to license, 500 people at a kiosk. That would be a violation of the licensing terms. But using a service account to run a enterprise-grade workflow, because you need it to be an enterprise-grade workflow, that's a perfectly legitimate use case. So, yeah.
But this gets super complicated and tricky for the average Power business user. Susie in HR makes a form, using Microsoft Forms, and then Bob in IT wants to create a flow to grab that form data and populate a SharePoint list and display it in a team. The SharePoint site's not group enabled, and wading through all of that is not something that mere mortals can figure out. So this whole idea of a Power user being able to do that when you've got 6 different connectors falls on its face pretty quickly when all of a sudden one of those key people leaves the company or gets added to a different group or taken out of a different group, and then unraveling that spaghetti nest of connectors, I hope is getting some serious brain power from colleagues, because it's tricky to, I mean, it's real easy to put yourself into a spot that you can't get out of and you have to start all over.
Yep. No.
To that question is, we have the white paper for the governance and administration.
Yep.
I read that thing. I try to digest it, but like you mentioned, there's like still very big sections that are like just like a little overviews, like, yeah, you can do this, or you can use PowerShell, and that's it. But it renders the information about PowerShell. Yep. Any other documentation, any other way that we can actually get more feedback for that or more documentation?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely the white paper is the best place to start. We are working on kind of additional, deeper documentation, building on what the white paper has in specific areas. So that's definitely one area that we're investing in to really provide that more granular guidance. Specifically in terms of flow and connections and sharing and security and all those types of things.
In my case, I get a lot of questions. I've been doing the app in a day several times. And one of the things that I encountered is that, that's okay for level 100. Level 200, they want to know more deeply into Power Apps flow. Yep. But then later on, we get into the questions with the CIO or IT operations. Give me all the IT, how to do the governance and administration. Not only for Power Apps, but also for flow. We get into those conversations, it's like we spend another day just trying to explain how can we do this. Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's something that we're very keenly aware of and trying to come up with clearer documentation and guidance and those types of things to make this more easy. Yeah.
Who writes the documentation? Technical writer or the Azure people?
The answer is yes.
Exactly. It's a combination of all of those. So we have specifically, generally the content gets kind of initially drafted by like myself and the people in the product team. The technical writers do a lot of work to kind of turn that into something that's consumable and yeah.
Because some of the technical writers that I'm actually making materials like
how in the world would they use this? Something I read in the materials, like this isn't correct, this is wrong.
The documentation is challenging. Trust me, it's very challenging. It's either inaccurate at times or it's dated. And you'll find it's more dated than anything else because it's the frequency of changes is so fast. There's not a team of persons just there making sure it's always accurate.
Yeah.
Is it most of the documentation now docs on Microsoft
Yeah.
using Git?
Yeah. So
Yes.
to piggyback on that, what I do myself and a lot of people in the MVP community is that if we see something that's wrong, because the docs are open source on GitHub, we can raise issues in GitHub and it'll be fixed. Sometimes it'll be fixed in seconds because somebody's there monitoring it and they just fix the issue. So that's the only way now to keep up with the changes that it's just it takes the community to be behind it.
Yep, that's a really good point because we shouldn't be having anything where when a new document is published, there's anything inaccurate. I mean, I can't guarantee it never happens, but that would be extremely rare. It's definitely going to be more the case of, I mean, we have probably thousands of pages of documentation kind of spread out, and it is difficult to make sure that, you know, every single change that happens, finding all the places that thing is being referred to. So having the community flag these things for us is a really useful thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe a feature request. I've been writing live flows in the past few months. I've got a couple of hundred things. So when I'm looking for a flow that I wrote in November, there's no way to like group them. They're just I have to scroll through, and I've been labeling them by name a certain way so I can find them, but there's no good way to find the flow that I was working on.
So one of the things that we've added recently is called solutions. So it's down here in the left navigation, and what solutions give you a way to do is group together flows. So when you come to solutions, you'll see that this particular environment that I have has a few of them, and really all a solution is it's kind of just a grouping of, you know, one or more things together. A single flow can technically live in multiple solutions, so it's actually a little bit more like a tag than a folder. So, you know, because sometimes you want to have different ways of grouping, so you can do it that way. But, you know, if you come to a particular solution, then you can see what's in it. And in this case, I guess I have I have a flow here, but I also have an app. And the other interesting thing about solutions is they can bring together different types of assets. So you can have a Power App, you can have entities in the CDS, you can have flows, and you can group them all together into these solutions, and then you even can export the solutions and put them, you know, in a folder in source control, for example, if you wanted, and you can use that to like back them up if you want to. Yeah.
Is there a DevOps story around that?
There is actually. So we have some guidance that we've published that you can actually create DevOps activities that will export solutions and move them. So the kind of for the advanced scenarios, you don't have to do this with solutions. If you just want to use them to group flows, you totally can. But if you want to use solutions as an ALM concept, you can actually create, you know, generally you have a development environment and a production environment, and you'll never be making edits directly in your production environment, right? You make your edits in your development environment, kind of validate that it works, and then you can take it from your development environment and push it to production. And you can create DevOps pipelines that will actually do that automatically. You can even have an intermediate environment where it's like a validation environment first, and you can test things out. And, you know, so there was actually a session at Build that was specifically on this topic, which I believe by now they're probably all posted and recorded. But yeah, this is the DevOps story, and this applies not just to Flow, but also to Power Apps and the Common Data Service and all of those things. So. Yeah.
This is kind of making everything into consolidated way. I think more than that, right? Like in my subscription, I have this many flows, and I can organize all my flows and apps into one location. That's all about solutions. Nothing else we could do, right?
Is there something else you have in mind, or?
Saying like, you know, now that I got everything into one place,
yep.
Is there a way I can organize the permissions, everything from here?
Yeah, so from this solution view, you can just get directly to the particular the particular flow and add or remove permissions and do those types of
Not
things.
right there.
That's correct. Yeah, it's you kind of click out and go to do it. There are some basic operations you can do here, like turning them on and off and those types of things. But generally, you click from here and it takes you to, well, in this case it doesn't work.
So basically, it is to centralize all your flows, apps, and everything.
That's to both centralize it, but also to provide a grouping, so that way, rather than one giant list of everything. Yeah.
Okay, so your Power Platform, any chance of putting a Power BI object into this solution?
By any chance, yes, there is definitely a chance.
Very good.
We are definitely working with the Power BI team to figure out how to bring these things together, because Power BI has a separate concept to group things together called apps, confusingly enough.
Which they just renamed to workspaces. Just had
well, I think they renamed them to app workspaces, actually, because there's still whatever the other workspaces are called. Okay, great. So anyway, there's a lot of iteration happening over there, and there's iteration happening over here, and we need to get these two in sync, so that way it's more rationalized. It is something that we're hoping to do.
Customer yesterday talking about the Power BI app workspaces, and this just got me thinking, if they had a Power App affiliated with their Power BI object, or a flow affiliated with it, there's no insight into that, so that interrelationship from an admin perspective about how all these things are sending PII data around makes me nervous from a security compliance perspective.
This is great feedback. If you want to send me a strongly worded email, I am more than happy to use that.
This is the real world stuff that,
yes.
I mean, now that we're empowering people to do these kind of things, it's like, hey, what's going on there? Well, I'm not really sure. He left, and now we're stuck.
Yep. Yeah.
Dean, it's not personal, it's just business.
Yeah, my business depends upon being able to answer these questions for the paying customers.
Yep, no, it's a great point. But yeah, so coming back to that flow that I created a while ago, you can see it did indeed run. Because I said yes, it went to SharePoint list and created an item in that SharePoint list. So once you've run one of these flows, it shows you all of the details of what happened. So you can use this to be able to debug and come back later and see everything that happened inside your flows. Yeah.
On the conditions, if on your list you have a multiple choice, like a pull down, what do you put equals to? It has to be in quotations, is it just free text? Or what's the requirement for that?
So generally, if you have a list of items, what you're going to want to do is something like the list contains something else. So like, imagine that I had a list, and this is what was output. This isn't actually what it looks like, but it was something like yes and no. So you don't actually have to do this, but basically you could say if it contains yes, right? So in this case, if I did responses here, which is a list, all of the responses. So if the responses contains yes, then it'll go down that branch if any one of the responses is yes. So that's kind of how you do that logic.
Can you go back to the approval process? Because you have the option yes, no, maybe, and later. Most of the time, okay, you use one of the premiums. Okay.
Yeah.
Who remembers sort of the debug a SharePoint workflow?
What's the story around auditing it? Let's say that you're the sixth
Yeah. So for the people working on the flows themselves, all of the activities are visible in that run history. So we saw an example of it there, but I can come here and I can see every action that this flow has taken. In addition, for administrators in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, you can see every operation that is taken on flow is tracked there.
Every operation.
Yeah, so every management operation. So basically, every time you create a flow, change a flow, share a flow, delete a flow, all of those things are there.
What about a transaction off the flow while the flow is in flight?
So for the things that the flow is doing, those are already in the Office compliance logs because they're in the Office connectors, right? So if I create an item in a SharePoint list, that is already going to show up in the SharePoint audit logs because it's an activity in SharePoint.
Right. What if the data store is not part of the Office 365 ecosystem?
So in that case, we don't have a kind of a consolidated audit store. So if an admin wanted to, say I created a bunch of flows that write data to a SQL database, and let's say I don't use SQL auditing, so I can't see any of that. As an admin, the admin can, for example, list all the flows that use that SQL database, and then they can come to this experience here as an admin, and then they can see all the activity that that flow did. So.
It's the same like SharePoint designer workflow, so you cannot debug anyway. So it's the same way flow also you cannot debug anything.
What do you mean by you cannot debug?
If flow is failed for some reason, is there a way to see like why it got failed?
Yes. So this experience here that I just clicked on, where in this case this flow ran successfully, but imagine that this action failed, right? I would actually be able to come here and see the exact error message, what happened before this action, what the outputs of all the other actions in the flow were that led to that failure. You can actually see that all here in this view.
This flow is like single step. Say like, if I create multiple approval levels and multiple conditions.
Yep.
It's very hard to say that, right?
Well,
is there a way to say like
give you an X it would fail.
Yeah, so let me pull up a much more complicated flow that I have, and we can take a look at it and see when and where it has failed. So up here you can actually see the kind of across all of your flows, are there failures that are happening? So you can see here, this flow failed at 4:07 on the 13th. I can click on this, and this flow, I believe, is a bit less simple than that previous flow. So in this case, I have a particular loop that has failed, and inside this loop, there's a particular action that has failed, and you can see here the exact details of what happened. So in this case, it's a 404. Which means probably I was trying to get a resource that didn't exist. But you can always kind of drill down and across all of the actions that exist, find specifically which one failed and the exact error message that came back from that thing. And this even works in loops. So even if I had, say I had a loop of 2,000 items, this next failed button here will jump you directly to that error. So if item 1,276 failed out of 2,000, you can actually just jump directly to that, and it'll show you that error message right in line there.
Yeah. So with this debugging question, I know the answer, but I'll ask if you want to answer it.
Yep.
So we can see where it failed. So can we go back and edit the flow and then rerun using the same data?
Yes, you absolutely can. So if I hit, say I had gone back and then fixed this flow, if I click resubmit, it's actually going to just replay the flow with that same initial trigger data, but with the new definition of the flow, presumably with whatever fix I made. So you can always kind of replay the flows in order to, redo something if it went wrong.
Exactly the same case. Like, if I have 5-level approval flow, and third approval is no more with the organization, and 2 have already approved, I cannot go back and ask them like, since he left the organization, I have to reinitiate the workflow, something like that.
So that you would still have to do in this case, because when you resubmit, it always starts from the beginning of that workflow. So it would, for those 2 initial approvers, it would resend them.
Then Nintex is the best in that case, right? Nintex we can delegate.
What? Sorry,
it's not a matter of best. It's just a scenario.
I mean to say like Nintex has the facility of delegating them in there.
But yeah, you can do delegation. This is if Nintex, if you've run through a workflow and it's gotten to the end and failed. I'm not familiar. I don't believe that you have the ability to.
You can't restart it.
Yeah.
You have to restart them.
Yeah.
You have to go from the beginning again. So
Yeah.
if we compare apples to apples, both are doing the same thing. Not the other product don't have more capabilities than what we have right now.
That's where developers come in and they write real code.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, we're not getting rid of anybody's jobs. That I can tell you.
When you gotta do that, that's when you gotta pay the extra bucks.
Yeah.
Well, can you speak to long running workflows?
Yes. So one of the things that we have with Flow today is there is a timeout on flows, which is 30 days. However, one of the new features that we recently released is the ability to have an approval process that can actually span multiple instances of a flow. Yep.
Before you go there.
Yes.
So if I get you right, look, this Flow has capability to delegate my approval flow, right?
You can
approval.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So like if I'm assigned, say I'm assigned this approval task, I can respond to it, or I can reassign it to somebody else and just give it to my manager.
Not you. Say like I have initiated. Third approver is no longer exists with the organization. Is there a way I can just change that a third approver from?
But who are you?
Okay, I'm an admin.
So you're not the person submitting the approval. You are the person who is
monitoring. Yes, I know. So I got a request from business saying, hey Krishna, this workflow is not working because the third approver is no longer with the organization. So we got somebody else. We have to replace that with this guy. So is there a way to do that?
Yes. So all of the approval data that exists is fully configurable by the admins. So the admins can change whatever they need.
Changing the flow. I think like you're talking about changing the flow itself.
Yep.
I'm talking about only that instance of the flow.
Changing the so you've hard coded an improvement into it. Is that what you're doing?
Or if you're hard coded it, then you have to change the process.
You have to change the process all over, right?
Yeah.
And then rerun the updated process.
Yeah, that's right.
I think another way to do it is have a list that has all your approvers in it, and you query that every time, and you just updated that list, and then you pull in.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
But he's sharing a common problem, right?
Right.
You got a workflow that sends out something to Joe.
Yep.
Joe no longer with the company.
Yep.
Right.
How do you administer that without having to kick the process out and start it over?
Check to see if you use
I totally agree with you guys.
Yeah.
Since it is going to be a step further, it's something that we address that as part of.
Yeah.
It's
got to put it somewhere, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You gotta realize that speaking from a consultant perspective, you have to consider your approaches before you start to build these items, right? Look to your scenarios as well and see where it's going to abend or potentially abend, and then come up with solutions for mitigation or at least retries. So it's always going to be an architectural decision that's going to probably create that problem in the first place. So if it does happen, it may be an opportunity to re-architect it, looking at it with fresh eyes. So some of these things, it's going to be a problem because it's designed that way and it's going to cost more.
And another thing, it's not like if I'm going to test it, I'm going to test it on production. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
Test it on a development environment and test, and then finally move it to production. I'm not going to test on production. I'm not going to mess up with production, even if it is broken. We fix it first in development, and then we move it to production.
Yeah.
For the one guy in this room who still uses SharePoint Designer, we still have the same problem. That's why when employees leave, the only thing we do is open up the workflow and publish it again, so that I become the user of it. So, for the one guy in this room who still uses SharePoint Designer, so that's the problem right now.
Yeah.
I installed it last month.
You did?
I didn't use it, but I installed it.
Yeah, I don't think I have a machine with it anymore. Oh yes, so long running workflows. So one of the things that we recently added is the ability to break apart the approval action that sends out the approval and then the action that receives the approval instance. So let me kind of explain what that means. So if I come in here, what I can do is I can first create the approval request. So there's these new actions which you'll see. So I can say here, create the approval. And you can choose all of your approval types. Just like before, I can put in my various options. But what this will do is this won't actually wait on that approval to complete. It will just submit the approval for creation. There's another thing I want to mention that's really useful about this is you also can now fully customize that approval email that gets sent out, because you can say, hey, instead of, I don't want those built-in notifications to be sent out, so I'm actually going to send an email with some custom content that I want in it. So I can come in here, and now in this action, I can use the data from that create approval action that was submitted to be able to send out a customized email. Then what you can do is you can create a separate flow that triggers when the approval is complete, that can do whatever you want. And the advantage of that is now you don't have a bunch of flow instances waiting, which potentially can time out. All you're doing is you're submitting the approval, it goes into the data service and waits for an approval task to complete, and then you have a separate flow that can be triggered a year later or even 2 years later. That can then take that approval task and go off and do whatever additional logic that you want.
Is that a polling service or is it a queue?
Internally, it uses a webhook. Actually, yes. So it's basically listening for new approvals to be submitted. So with that pattern, you can make approvals last however long you'd like.
That is amazing. You guys should talk about it more.
Yes.
That is a huge blocker when I talk to people about flow.
Yeah, and I think in this particular case, we just rolled this out like over the past couple of weeks, so we still need to get all of the documentation updated. So that's what we're working through right now, is we're talking about, hey, there's documents that are out of date that we need to go do. So we're currently just getting all that docs updated, and that's, yeah.
And then
Yes, there will definitely be a flow of the week blog post in that one.
Having that, customization for the message on the body.
Yes.
We've been asking a lot for that.
Yes.
How can I do my custom with HTML, with CSS? How do we do it? From the original approval. This one is actually one of the best things that a lot of my customers are asking for.
Yep.
Can you drop an actionable item into the email like
So we don't yet support actionable cards to Outlook. We do have actionable cards for Teams, but not for Outlook. That is something that we're looking at adding. At the moment, it's just an HTML editor, so you can put in whatever HTML content you want here. But we don't yet support custom actionable message cards in Outlook.
So I can't drop the buttons into the email and just have them come in.
Correct. The way that this would work is you could create buttons, but they would be links, right, to approve or reject. Kind of like the way it used to work before we had actionable. Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. So this is one of those new things that is just available now, and hopefully that can enable you to make more rich and tailored approval scenarios. Yeah.
So trigger that's on a new item, or when a new item is created or modified.
Mm-hmm.
You have to basically look to see, compare the created and modified time to see if it was a modified part of the item or
yep.
not. Because you have to put all that logic in there. There's no way to flag it.
So
I wrote something and it
yep.
just got, and it updated itself. I had to update that item, like approved or somebody approved or something, which triggered it again. And I had to check for that, and I had to lock the data.
Yeah.
At that point, and I had basically start from scratch.
So one of the things that we're working on, so we don't have this available yet for SharePoint, is the ability to choose which fields trigger the flow to start. So we do have this for the common data service, for example. So I can just show you what that looks like. And it's like a attribute filter. So here, let me just pick an entity real quick. And so this is like SharePoint, right, where you pick a site and a list. And here what I can do is I can just pick which field or column in SharePoint actually has to change to trigger this thing. So I can say, hey, if the account rating changes, and this flow will only trigger if the account rating changes. If any of the other fields change, it will not trigger this flow. Sweet. And you can actually add additional, you can have multiples, right? So this is an or. So basically, if this field changes or the longitude changes, then trigger the flow. So we are looking at how we can do the same scenario for SharePoint, but you can do this today with the Common Data Service.
So a little bit trivial, but on the same topic. So you mentioned or. Is it multiple ors and or is it just only ors?
So this filter is just an or. I mean, theoretically, we could kind of go down the rabbit hole here of allowing you to like build your own expression logic, and I'd say we're starting kind of with this level of simplicity, and we can always.
So make sure when I speak about it,
yes. Yes. Yeah, that's right. It's just if any of these fields change, then it will cause the trigger. Yeah.
Change a little bit. Can you talk about a little bit about flow runs and quotas for by the month?
Yeah.
Because I created a bunch of flows that I thought I was like really awesome, but because they call another and then they trigger another and then they trigger another, and they they keep bouncing and bouncing. The process keeps flowing without a problem, but then I reach my quota very quickly, and
so
when it becomes easy to create a parent-child, then actually just let them trigger each other.
There are two types of limits in the system. So basically, there are throttles that we have in place that they're kind of hard limits that exist mostly to protect our service. So if you go to Bing and search flow limits, or if you use Alta Vista, whatever your favorite search engine is, you can see here the specific types of limits that we have. So for like taking actions inside of a loop, for example, it's either 5,000 or 100,000 depending on what plan you're on. So this is one kind of reference. The other thing is the flow runs associated with your plans, right? And the way that works is that is a amount that each user contributes to a tenant pool. So for example, if say you have 100 users in your organization who each have an Office 365 E3 license, you would get 200,000 flow runs per month for your organization. Now, there is that is good insofar as it allows one person who's doing a little more than 2,000 to go over. There's theoretically a drawback there of one person could eat up your whole organization's quota and then block everybody else. Yeah, so that's where, and today we just have kind of visibility for admins, so they can go to the admin center and they can see kind of which flows are using up the runs, what users are using up the runs. We are looking at creating features so that way capacity can be kind of dedicated or allocated to certain processes or people, so that way it avoids this problem. Yeah, like quotas. Yeah, that's right.
Admin flow to monitor that, so I get alerted when we're 80% spent.
I actually don't know if the flow admin connector can read the quota data. It should be able to, but I just don't know off the top of my head if that particular action is there. Ultimately,
You can generate something in the security compliance center because it's passing through that anyway. So and then you can have a delegation coming from resource compliance center. Certain compliance center.
Yeah.
New topic. There's a preview environment of some kind.
Yes.
That I haven't really investigated.
Yes.
How do we find out about when something goes into that, and when it's going to move from there into production, and how can we use that effectively?
So really the core function of the preview environment is to let you have, for example, your tests and your things running there first. So that way you can validate that your flows or your applications aren't broken in preview. And if they are, you can discover that quickly and potentially either raise a support case with Microsoft because we broke you, or maybe it's something on your side to go fix. So that's really the primary function of the preview environment.
I thought it was like early release of new features. Did I misunderstand?
So new features do come out in the preview environment typically 1 to 2 weeks before they're available in production.
Okay.
But it's not quite like Office Insiders where like you get stuff there for months before. Okay. It's really more to have a test environment of the new things that are coming, so that way you know the new things won't break your existing processes. So that's really kind of the core purpose of the preview environment.
Can we schedule these flows?
Yes, flows can be scheduled kind of however you would like. So based on the motion in the room, I feel like I'm running up against time here. Before I close out, I wanted to just make sure I hit the primary things that people were asking about. So SharePoint workflow replacement. There's kind of two primary areas that we're working on right now in terms of workflow parity. One is the site-associated workflows, and the other one is kind of the advanced document operations. So things like folder creation, doc set management, check-in, check-out. And with those, we are working on closing out these kind of two remaining gaps this year. So hopefully that should be good. And we also, I mean, today you can do these things by using that HTTP action that exists inside of SharePoint. But obviously, as we were discussing earlier, that's not native. We want it to be native, so that way it just works.
Quick question about that.
Yes.
If we have to write, let's say we have to use an HTTP connector to do one of those processes, does that require plan form?
So the SharePoint connector has a built-in HTTP action that can connect to any of the SharePoint web APIs, okay, and that does not require a plan form.
Anything else does?
That is correct. Yes. There was a question about when should you use different types of filters. So for this one specifically, number one recommendation, it is not pleasant, but use OData filters whenever you can. Because OData filters allow the filtering to happen on the service side. So if you have, say, a SharePoint list with like 5,000 items, you don't want to download all 5,000 items into your flow and then try to do filtering there. It's far, far better to do a filter statement when the call to SharePoint, and then you get back only your 100 items and then do your logic there. So I know that OData filter logic and syntax is a little esoteric and difficult to use. I myself can't figure it out half the time, and a little bit of trial and error, but it definitely will help you make your flows kind of as efficient as possible. And definitely avoid the pattern of doing a for each loop and inside that doing a condition to do filtering. That's the worst possible way to do it. So try not to do that because it's going to go a lot slower than you'd like. In terms of recent features, so I think I touched on these, the ability to do more than 30-day custom messages. So those things came out. We have a new thing called Action Center coming. That is going to bring in not just the approval tasks that we already have today, but also the business process flows. Has anybody heard of business process flows? Yeah, I mean, this is a new area that we're investing in, and we're bringing in some of these capabilities from Dynamics. And business process flows, think of them as like approval flows on steroids. They allow you to do really complex multi-stage processes that bring together additional logic. So you can definitely check that out. So this should be coming out within the next few weeks.
This will work without Dynamics?
No Dynamics license is required. That's correct.
That's really confusing.
Yes. So one of the things we've been working on is making it like CDS is the thing that you'll need going forward for most things. You don't need Dynamics really for anything. So Flow Plan 2, that's correct. Yep. And then the other thing that's coming is.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Because
yes.
I'm from the Dynamics world.
Yes.
So I started with version 1.2 a long
yep.
time ago.
Yep.
Now that we have model-driven applications, why business process flow is not part of the model application? Why is it flow?
It can be part of the model-driven application.
Actually, that's where you apply the
yes.
the business process flow.
That's right.
So, it should be part of the tools that part of the business process flow. On my mind.
So it is there as well. It's just like Flow in that Flow you can use inside of Canvas-based Power Apps and model-driven Power Apps. So the business process flows you absolutely can do in model-driven apps. One of the things we're working on is making it so that way the business process flows, you can use them standalone outside of model-driven apps as well as in Canvas apps.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So yeah.
And even the business process
Yep.
You got a bunch of business processes running in SharePoint from what I can tell.
And then just the last thing is guest user support. So today with Flows, we don't currently support guest users, so this is coming. We're just putting the finishing touches on this right now. It should be out within the next 2 weeks. So yeah, and that was pretty much all that I had. So yes.
Thank you.
Guys,
okay, great. Yeah.
If you could give us some session feedback, that'd be great. Just QR code. If not, that's okay too. But we're trying to collect more feedback as we do these events to see if they're better. If you could just